Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Bill McCabe. I'm a Ridgewood High School graduate from the class of 1989. I'm the president of the Ridgewood High School Alumni Association. I'm a sales director at Donnelly Financial Solutions, and I'm the parent of 3 future RHS grads. It's my pleasure to invite you to our 3rd installment of the Alumni Career Lecture Series. Tonight, I'll be joined by Tim Monahan. Tim will be our lead interviewer. He's a 1997 graduate of RHS. He's one of the trustees on the Ridgewood High School Alumni Association board. He's an economics teacher at RHS. He was the 2020 Teacher of the Year, and he's the parent of a future RHS grad. Our guest speaker tonight is really exciting. Ajay Kirtane is a 1990 graduate. He's a professor of medicine at Columbia University Irving Medical Center. He's a practicing interventional cardiologist, researcher, and educator. So first, before we get into the interview, let me tell you a little bit about the Ridgewood High School Alumni Association and how it was formed. It was the idea of Dr. Tom Gorman. For those of you who know Dr. Gorman, he's a 1987 graduate of the high school. He was the principal of RHS from 2012 to 2020. That time, he was asked to be the acting superintendent. And we're very excited to announce tonight, for those of you that don't know, Dr. Gorman was named the full-time superintendent of the Ridgewood Public Schools. But a number of years ago, Dr. Gorman had an idea. He recognized the very strong affinity so many generations of alumni have for RHS and thought to himself, why can't we, even though we're just a public high school, why can't we take a prep school or college-like approach to our alumni? And that spawned the idea of creating an alumni association. He gathered a few graduates, and they developed in 2014 the Ridgewood High School Alumni Association as a 501c3 nonprofit. So a couple of things about the Ridgewood High School Alumni Association, some of our accomplishments and some of our programs, for those of you that don't know too much about us. In 2019, we launched Reunion Weekend, modeled after a college type of reunion. So for any class that's celebrating a milestone reunion, their 5th, their 15th, their 25th, their 30th, or 40th, whatever the case may be, they now can align that reunion so that it aligns with this weekend. And in 2019, 3 classes, class of 84, class of 89, and class of 94 did that. We had a couple of events to supplement those classes' reunions, mainly a lawn party where people were gathering during the day on a Saturday to enjoy some lawn fun and some games. They could bring their spouses, their kids, or their partners, or whoever they wanted to. And also they could take tours of the high school led by our RHS ambassadors. It was a great launch to a great event. Of course, in 2020, many things changed, and we had to postpone that event. So this year in 2021, we're having our 2nd reunion weekend, but we're terming it the Super Reunion because we'll have actually 2 classes or 2 years of classes that ended in a 0 or a 5, celebrating a milestone reunion last year, or classes that ended in a 1 or 6, celebrating a milestone reunion this year. So if you're one of those classes or in one of those classes, make sure your reunion leaders have been in touch with the Alumni Association to join this weekend. Now, the agenda for the weekend is really exciting. Friday night, there's a football game, so people will gather at the game and have fun with food trucks and other things that are going on. After the game, there'll be events in downtown Ridgewood with some bars and restaurants that are going to help put together some specials and some fun events. On Saturday morning, we'll have that same lawn party. People can bring their family and they can have a nice time back at the campus and take advantage of seeing the school maybe for the first time in a long time. Now, Saturday afternoon, we're adding another new event this weekend, and it's a really exciting event. So on Saturday afternoon, we're having what we call a chalk talk. So 1991, there was a legendary football team from RHS that won the state championship. They were coached by Chuck Johnson, who many of you I'm sure know and remember, a 1970 graduate of RHS. Chuck is a legendary football coach in New Jersey and known by many and admired by many. On his staff of that 1991 team was Drew Gibbs. Coach Gibbs went on to run the Ramapo football program, and he runs that to this day. Also very decorated like Coach Johnson. So those 2 coaches still coach to this day, 30 years after that legendary football team. Now, 2 of the players on that team, one is Mark Kosick, who lives in Ridgewood, and really is all things Ridgewood. He's put together an exciting event where we're going to have both of those coaches on directors' chairs on the football field talking about that season. But here's the exciting part, or one of the exciting parts. It's going to be hosted by Ridgewood alumnus Willie Geist. Ridgewood, as I'm sure many of you know, Willie, I'm sure many of you know, is the former host of the Today Show. He's also involved with Morning Joe and has his own program, The Sunday Today with Willie Geist. So it's going to be a great event, whether you played football or not, whether you're on the team or not, to listen to Willie and the coaches talk about that incredible season. So that'll be during the day. At night, on Saturday night, the classes will go do their own events. And then the final leg of that weekend will be Jim Stroker, who many of you know, particularly from the BF side, was a coach and teacher, loved by many. Is going to lead an event on the lawn, a yoga session to kind of close out the weekend with a little bit of kumbaya. So anyways, people are invited to join us that weekend and take advantage of those different programs, but that's something that the Alumni Association oversees. Another thing that we do is we honor and celebrate our alumni through the Distinguished Alumni Society. The Distinguished Alumni was launched in 2008, before the Alumni Association existed, but it actually really only was in play for about 1 year. In 2014, when the Alumni Association was reformed, the Distinguished Alumni Society was reinvigorated, and it's a biennial event where we honor alums who have done extraordinary things with their lives. Now, in 2020, we reached out to Dr. Kirtane to honor him into the society. He had to defer, and in fact, we had to actually later cancel the event and postpone it because of COVID. So in March 22, we're actually going to recognize, 2022, we're going to recognize two classes, the 2020 inductees and the 2022 inductees. And we're really excited to have Dr. Kirtane be a part of that. So that's the dinner event. For those of you who get to go back to RHS, if you want to know where the actual society is, or the gallery is, I should say, when you're walking up the steps with the football field behind you, right as you enter the doorway, if you pivot to your right, you'll see plaques of some of the distinguished alums, and you can read about their biographies. Another thing that the Ridgewood High School Alumni Association does is facilitates financial gifts back to RHS. Now, many people don't realize that a public high school would even want financial gifts or could use them, but I can tell you they sure can. And if that's of interest to you in any way, shape, or form, there's many opportunities, which we'll talk about at the end of the program. Another big thing that's important to us is honoring our students. And a great example of that is last year during the COVID time period. Around May, the seniors at RHS were not even sure if they would have a graduation. And it was a dark time for many. So one of our trustees thought to themselves, I have an interesting idea to really show our support as a community for those graduates. We developed 436 individualized banners, one for each senior, and then four groups of teams made up of teachers, parents, and alums woke up early on a Saturday morning and installed those banners at BF, GW, RHS, and Graydon. So the entire town woke up on a Saturday with these 436 banners, and I think it helped lift the spirits and just let the graduates know that the Alumni Association is thinking about them. The last thing we've done, and we've done it just this year, and it's been really exciting, is launching the Career Network. The Career Network's intended to help students and alums from a career standpoint, and it's really a two-pronged program. First is the RHACS, and I'll let Tim talk about the acronym for RHACS. Everything in Ridgewood we know has to have an acronym, so this does too. But it's an externship program we'll be talking more about in the spring, where we're connecting RHS students with pods of alumni in groups of about 3 to 7 to talk very candidly and intimately about their careers. And the second prong is the Alumni Career Lecture Series, which is what tonight is all about. This is our third installment. Our first installment was with Jamie Caridi. She's the Chief Administrative Officer of Wells Fargo Securities. She talked about her career in business and in marketing and finance. Her second installment was with Michael Aaron Flicker, who talked about entrepreneurship in the marketing and advertising firm Xenosci that he created as a freshman at RHS and still runs today, 25 years later. This third installment is equally exciting, and we're pivoting to the medical field. We're very pleased to have Dr. Ajay Kirtane here. And with that, I will turn it over to Tim Monahan. Tim is one of our trustees, and there's nobody better to lead this interview. He's been connecting his students with alumni his entire career. So with that, Tim, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Bill. And thank you everyone in the audience for being here tonight. We have a large number of people that are streaming live, and we're having a large number of people that are going to be watching this recording after the webinar is concluded. I wanted to start by saying thank you to Dr. Kirtane for agreeing to join us tonight. I'm very excited to get the interview going. I wanted to briefly mention something about the RHACS program. RHACS stands for the Ridgewood Alumni Externship Program, and we are ready to roll. You're going to be hearing more about how students can sign up. At this point, we've had almost 70 different alumni from different careers and different decades of graduation from Ridgewood High School agree to participate in this mentorship opportunity. So the next step is going to be opening the door for juniors and seniors who are interested to apply to the program. And once they've done that, we will do our best to pair them up with who we think is the best alumni for them to learn from. And more to follow on that. That's a very exciting program that's just being launched. But more importantly, we should be talking about our special guest tonight and how this event is going to go forward. I'd like to mention that we could not have put this event together without the help of Fiona Rosenholtz and Jamie Caridi, two trustees of the Ridgewood High School Alumni Association. And I want to give a very, very, very big thank you to Mrs. Sandy Kunzel. She's the director of the Ridgewood High School Academy of Health Professions program and the CMP program as well. She was instrumental in getting word about this event out. And thank you so much to all the RHS students who submitted some questions in advance. This evening, I'm going to be conducting the interview based on some of the questions I received in advance. Anyone in the audience should also feel free and encouraged to use the Q&A feature to push questions that either Bill McCabe or myself will use during the interview with Dr. Kirtane. When the event is finished, I will be sharing some contact information for Dr. Kirtane. So any student or anyone else in the audience who would like to get in touch and possibly follow up a little bit more will have the chance to do so. On that note, we are really fortunate to have our guest this evening. You've heard a lot about his background. I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief biography. It started at Travell Elementary School and it moved to BF, and his career only began in 1990 when he graduates Ridgewood High School. Dr. Kirtane is an attendee and a graduate of Princeton University. He attended received medical training at Columbia University. He's done his residency and internship at the University of California, San Francisco, and is also a Harvard Fellow. What is so interesting about Dr. Kirtane is, on the one hand, he is an expert in his field of practice. So you're going to be hearing this evening about interventional cardiology and endovascular intervention. But as an educator, I have to say, I think it's really awesome that Dr. Kirtane is also a professor at Columbia University, and an award-winning one at that. As you already heard, he was inducted into the Distinguished Alumni in 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Ridgewood Maroons, please welcome Dr. Ajay Kirtane. Doctor, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening. I wanted to kick things off by asking some of the excellent questions that current Maroons have asked. And I'm going to start off by just asking you in general, what led you to the path that has taken you to your career?
Well, I'm an Indian guy, so I got to go into medicine, right? No, I think that it's interesting. My parents are both physicians, and I was always exposed to medicine for a long time. But it was something I desperately did not want to do, because I just didn't want to be just like another Indian guy. And actually, we can talk about that later, but that comes along with, high school development and how things were in Ridgewood at those times as well. But basically, I think what ended up happening is I liked the science part of molecular biology, which is what my major was in college. But I realized I just didn't want to hang out in the lab talking to my pipettes and my gels that I was running. And I liked the interpersonal interactions. And so as a result, medicine kind of came along as the perfect opportunity. And it's been great. I honestly really, really value the interactions that I get with my patients, their families. And in addition, luckily, because of where I'm situated, I can do education, I can do research as well, and really, have a different day in my work week every day of the week, which keeps things very fresh.
That's great. You actually segued perfectly for me. I was wondering, and a question that we ask a lot of guests, and something that the RACS program is going to be built around is, would you mind sharing what maybe the average day or the average work week for you as a cardiologist is like?
Absolutely. And it's a little different because I'm in academics. So, in a academic medical center, a lot of times physicians, as people know, they see patients during the day, they may be doing procedures. For me, my Mondays and Fridays are procedure days. So I kind of get up early. The procedures start typically 7:30. So I have to say hi to the family and the patients ahead of that time. And then we'll do procedures, and a catheterization procedure we may go into in a little more detail. On average, it can be an hour. The complicated ones are like 4 hours. And we do a bunch of those cases on a given day. And so that's my Monday and that's my Friday. My Tuesday is an administrative day because as director of the cath lab, I have a bunch of meetings and operational things I have to take care of. Wednesday is a focused research day. And then Thursday is my outpatient clinic day, which is a little bit different for what I do compared to, for instance, a traditional surgeon. Surgeons do have clinic, but oftentimes once they're done with the procedure, they'll see one patient for a follow-up and that's it. For me, as a cardiologist that does procedures, I see patients, ad infinitum, basically their families, and it's beyond just the procedure. It's actually taking care of their, lifestyle and exercise programs and all of that as well. And I really value that because over time, procedural things can sort of get rote, but it's those interpersonal interactions and talking to people about their families and how their kids are growing up, how my kids are growing up, that really keeps that bond of being a physician vibrant. And it's something I cherish in terms of what I do.
That's awesome. Thank you. I was wondering if we can pivot to talking about interventional catheterization. Would you mind giving us just an overview, maybe not the full medical school description, but how about catheterization for dummies for people like me? I'm just curious about the procedure in general. And I know you and I have talked about some of the advances that have occurred in our lifetime in the process and the procedure and the entry. And from there, I know there's some student follow-up questions that I'll probably follow up with.
Yeah, there were a ton of student questions on this, and I'm happy to go into it. The brief overview is that oftentimes patients can have blocked heart arteries, and the arteries supply oxygen to the heart muscle. And when those arteries are blocked, traditionally, patients needed to go through an open heart surgery where they would cut the chest open, and some family members may have had that, and that's a very effective therapy, but it's a more morbid therapy. In other words, it really takes a significant recovery period to actually happen. What we tend to do in the cath lab is we will go in either through the femoral artery that's in the leg or the radial artery, where you can take your pulse. When you can feel your pulse, we actually go in through that artery, and using tubes and wires can actually get into the heart. And the way we steer it is by using X-ray equipment. So it's literally like I'm manipulating here, but I'm looking at the X-ray screen in front of me to then direct the catheters and the tubes to where I need to take pictures. I'll then take pictures. If the arteries are blocked, then we can then open those arteries by putting in balloons and stents. The stent stays in, the balloon sort of comes out, and the patient goes home the same day or sometimes the next day, depending on how sick the patient is. And so this advance of being able to do it minimally invasively was something that interested me, especially because for patients with heart attacks, you're legitimately saving their lives by doing these types of procedures. And for me, that was something that was appealing about it, because I always felt it was an honor to be able to try to save someone's life and then actually be able to do it, which is why I'm excited by it.
So one of the questions that I was pouring through earlier that I found interesting is, are these procedures ever performed at a pediatric level?
Yeah, luckily most kids don't have blocked arteries, but there are a bunch of other things that can be done in the catheterization laboratory. And so for kids with congenital heart defects or valvular problems, there's a whole specialty of pediatric interventional cardiology. And we work closely with those colleges, and it's a fascinating field. It's a different field. And so for me, in the path to my training was medical school, then residency, then cardiology fellowship, then interventional cardiology fellowship, and then I finished. And that was overall like a 12-year type of process of training. So a long time, but if you're dedicated and it's fun for you, then it's always worth it when you do it.
So I have to ask a current event question. It's been in the news a lot lately that Aaron Boone, the manager of the New York Yankees, just had a pacemaker put in. Is this the type of procedure? Is this in your ballpark? How does that type of procedure compare or contrast with what you're a specialist in?
So it actually is done in the same facility, but we're so super specialized these days that interventional cardiologists typically deal with the plumbing and electrophysiologists deal with the electricity. And so a pacemaker is needed when there's an arrhythmia or a challenge with the electrical wiring of the heart. And so the electrophysiologists are the ones who typically do those procedures. It's also interesting that because we're in New York, it's super specialized like that. If I were perhaps in a more rural area, then I might do both stents and pacemakers and everything else as well. But it's a very effective therapy for sure.
Okay, so there, as you know, there were some really specific questions. I'm really proud of the RAP program that we have at the high school and Mrs. Kunzel's students. So I wanted to ask a couple of the more, I'd say, precise things here. So I guess the one that I like to start with is, how do you ensure that the catheter travels through the body and reaches the correct location?
Yeah, you have to be good. But the way you do it is using the X-ray machine. So the catheters and the dye that we use, they're all what we call radio opaque. So in other words, you see them as a dark image on the screen. And if you just look at a regular chest X-ray, your lungs, for instance, you see right through them. You don't really see the lungs. And so as a result, by taking advantage of that, we move the table around and we are able to steer the catheters and the wires to be able to get them to where they need to go. And in reality, it's just something that requires training. It's not something that you know, is super complex or unteachable. That's one of the reasons why we have training programs to help train residents, fellows, and beyond to sort of do what I do.
So kind of a follow-up, and we're going to stick with the specific medical questions for a couple more here. So if anyone from the audience has anything specific to catheterization, it's probably a good time to put those in the Q&A feature right now. But one of the students wants to know, is there another procedure that serves the same purpose as a cardiac catheter, but is more invasive? And if so, when does something more invasive like that have to occur to look at the heart?
Yeah, I think you know, heart surgery, open heart surgery is definitively something that's more invasive and can be very effective for people with multiple blockages. One of the things I really like as a cardiologist that not only does procedures but sees patients is I can determine that for many patients, you know, medicines may be the best thing. Weight loss, exercise, all of those things are super important, and they can prevent you from ever having to have a procedure done. Now, some people may say, well, you're a procedural person, so that's not good for you. I'm like, no. I'm an interventional cardiologist, which means that I like any intervention that works. So if you're able to lose 20 pounds on, you know, going out and working out and stuff like that, that's awesome. And we'll spend the entire visit talking about what workout you do and that kind of thing. Because I'm used to patients, for instance, saying, yeah, I work out. And then you say, what do you do? And then they say, well, I kind of, you know, walk my dog to the end of the driveway and back. So we go into details about that kind of thing. And then sometimes if patients have more extensive disease, we'll refer them to cardiac surgeons. But one of the nicest things I think about medicine is it's very collaborative, and we work hand in hand with other colleagues to be able to figure out what the best therapy is for the individual patient, so that they can get the best outcome.
Okay, so we have a question live from the audience, and this is a Ridgewood alum that I'm very good friends with. This is from Jason Lawani, and I'm going to read it out loud verbatim. It says, Medtronic has been in the news lately for their stent recall. Has that, or will that have any impact on your work? And what's the proper course of correcting a recall situation like that? I like that question because it kind of harkens to law as well as medicine.
You know, I don't actually know specifically what stent that's being referred to, so maybe in a different area. But in general, you know, when we have medical devices or drugs, they're studied very well with rigorous trials. That having been said, there can be issues that arise when you're using them, and you certainly want these devices and drugs to be safe in the patients in whom you use them. So typically speaking, if you notice that there's some anomaly or some malfunction or something like that, you end up reporting it. There's a specific mechanism by which that happens. And everybody's very responsible about taking those things very seriously, and then potentially even recalling it initially to figure out what the problem is to then be able to use it again. So I'm not speaking specifically about this circumstance because I'm not familiar with it, but in general, that's kind of how it works. And as a physician, you always want to be responsible to your patients first. So we tend to be pretty keenly aware of when something's not performing the way it should be, and we try to rectify that.
On this topic, a couple of the students have asked some specifics about the procedure. So I'll just give you two, and you can go in whichever order you like. How long does the procedure take is one question that came up a couple times. And a kind of related question is, what's the actual material that the catheter is made of? And do they have to have different material for different types of patients? And what happens to them in the long term?
All great questions. So in general, if we're just going to take pictures of the heart arteries, that we call that the diagnostic portion of the procedure, where we're sort of making the diagnosis, that's going to be, half an hour to 45 minutes max. And that includes the prep time and that sort of thing. If we're going to treat something with a stent or other, like a valve or things like that, then we sort of, go from an hour and a half, 2 hours, the really complex ones, 4, 5, 6 hours and beyond. But in general, we tend to do very easily, you can do 5 to 10 cases in a single room in a day on kind of a lab day that I have. As far as the materials go, the catheters themselves are hollow tubes, and that's what we use to inject dye through them. The way we get the catheters to where we want to be is by using a wire, which is steerable, and then we advance those tubes over the wire like a train would go over train tracks. In general, those all come out. The only thing that gets left behind is a stent, which is usually a sort of a nickel or platinum alloy, and that can be left behind. There's also drug on the stent to be able to prevent scar tissue from forming. And this is all like bioengineering. This is pretty cool stuff because you're directly giving a drug to a very specific part of the heart artery. Someone had asked, are there allergic reactions to this? Rarely. It's very, very rare, fortunately. So that's not something we typically ask patients for because they're all designed to be biocompatible. But that's kind of how it works. For a pacemaker, that's just a box of metal with circuitry inside it that gets left behind.
Awesome. And I'm going to read a question from Kathleen Belfont that's closely related to this. And I apologize if you already said this, but Kathleen's question is, do stents need to be replaced eventually?
We hope not. They can re-narrow. When you put a stent inside an artery, that elicits an inflammatory response, kind of like a scar. And there are other people of color who get keloids forming, and you may have seen those. That's kind of like what happens inside the stent itself. And so that's why the drug is there to prevent that process from occurring. In general, with our current stents and good implantation technique, and there's a lot of variations of technique, the things you can do in the lab to make it better. The rate of re-narrowing is probably in the single digits over the course of 5 years or so. But if it re-narrows, then sometimes you have to either put another stent in, sometimes you have to send the patient for surgery. So in general, it's a very safe and highly effective procedure, but especially at centers like ours, we actually get a lot of referrals for people who've had stent failures, and then we have to rectify those.
Tim, there's a good question here about what are some of the, Doctor, what are some of the downfalls of catheterization and how could those aspects be improved?
Here's the thing, whenever you do a procedure, it's an invasive procedure and you're taking somebody who's maybe in a heart attack, obviously you need to save their life, but if it's for an elective somebody like your mom or dad or somebody like that, they're coming in from home and you're doing a procedure on them. And so you have to be able to do it safely. We individualize the risk of what we do based upon the patient. And there's times when we sort of say, look, the benefit's going to be minimal, the risk is going to be greater than that, so we shouldn't really be doing this. There are techniques that have evolved over time. There's training. We were involved in a lot of that to not only know how to do the procedure safely, but because complications can happen, to train how to be able to react in those circumstances where you are able to fix the problem. And that's really the mark of a good physician, I think, is the ability to, when stuff starts going crazy, to be calm and with the team, because it's not just you, it's the whole team, be able to manage that patient through that complication, save the situation, and then follow the patient after that point to be sure they're safe.
So it sounds like there isn't a stock answer to that question of what are some of the downfalls. It's really very much situational.
Yeah, and I mean, the major risks that have been described are, bleeding or infection at the site where we go in. You can have a small chance of a heart attack or a stroke on the order of, 1 in 500 to 1 in 1,000. And you can, even sometimes die during a procedure like that, very rare. But, it's the one thing that's interesting about statistics is that these are all numbers, but if you're the patient, it's either going to happen to you or not. And if it happens, it's horrendous. So what you really need as a physician is to be able to convey that you care, that you're trying to avoid those things from occurring. You'll do your best to prevent them from occurring. and that you're doing the procedure for the right reason. There's an actual reason that you need to help this person because they're having a heart attack or they're having a lot of chest pain or something like that.
I wanted to shift gears a little bit. We can return to the very technical questions that are being asked, but I was wondering if I could put you on the spot and ask you, we're at about a year of the COVID-19 shutdowns and protocols. And, you know, as a absolutely essential and frontline worker, first of all, thank you for all you do for your patients and for your students to keep these procedures running. So you're doing two things. You're training the next generation of doctors, and you're performing these very essential procedures. How has COVID changed your world, and what's it been like this last year? If you could speak to that.
Well, I think it's been tough for everybody. And to be perfectly honest with you, you know, it's especially in the spring when people were coming out and applauding us. And my parents live right across the street from Valley Hospital. So, you know, they were out there cheering on people in the hospital. That's an amazing feeling to being the recipient of. But I'm so sympathetic and empathetic to all the people that stayed home to keep everybody else safe, because in some ways it's easier to go to work and interact with people and do your job than it is to just sit at home and think that you're trying to protect other people. So first, thank you to everybody who did that, because the thanks are certainly reciprocated on, you know, from all of our standpoint. COVID was tough because basically there's been a lot of studies showing that in the world of cardiology, patients didn't come to the hospital when they should have for heart attacks, for chest pain, and for a lot of problems like that. And they were scared, and we get it. And also the hospitals were overwhelmed. So it was uniquely a challenge for us, was that we knew that there were people probably having these problems, but they didn't have a way to come to us, and we couldn't take care of them. The other part of it is that all of our nurses were redeployed to COVID units. And me, myself, I was attending in a COVID ICU. So if there was a patient that needed to have a procedure done, we had to scramble a team to be able to get them down there to be able to do the procedure. And so that was some of the most challenging parts of it. There was obviously fear because we didn't have enough PPE and all of that. But over time, I think we've been able to manage this, but we're still not out of the woods yet. The vaccines are great. But people, I was driving near, Westwood for takeout because I live in Demarest now, and there are a ton of people in the restaurants and stuff like that. And I guarantee you, we're not all vaccinated. And as somebody in the healthcare profession, while we understand that it's, people need to get out and stuff, we just worry because we know someone like that's going to end up in the hospital, and that's somebody's family member or loved one. So that's a lot. That's challenging.
Absolutely right. So on this topic of health, I've noticed that the audience has a lot of questions about healthy habits, and I'm going to kind of put a bunch of questions together. I'm seeing it very frequently asked, do you speak to your patients about their healthy eating habits or the exercise habits they have? Is that part of the process of your interaction with the patients? Seems to keep coming up too.
Yeah, absolutely. As a cardiologist, I do the procedure, that's fine. But once that's done and I'm still seeing the patients for follow-up, 6 months, a year, depending on what they need, even shorter than that, a lot of the visit is focused on, what the medicines are, why the medicines are important, because it's really interesting. Physicians like to think that when they prescribe a medicine, patients take them. There are good studies that show that when I prescribe something, maybe not me, because I think I'm a better doctor, but the average doctor, when they prescribe a medicine, only 2/3 of the time do the patients actually fill the prescription. And when they fill the prescription, only 2/3 of the time do they actually take the medicine the way the physician prescribed it. Just think of yourself, whenever you had antibiotics for like a bronchitis or something, did you actually take like all 7 of those pills, or did you kind of stop taking them when you started feeling better? And so that part of medicine, the being able to talk to patients, to relate to patients, and to sort of know when they're just saying, yes, doctor, I'm taking my medicines, but they're actually not taking them, that requires like interpersonal skills. And similarly, talking to them about their exercise routines. And I get into it with people, like I ask them when they're on the treadmill, well, how many miles per hour do you go? What's the incline? And I can do that as a specialist because I'm really only focused on the heart. There are general doctors out there who take care of all the parts of the body. But for me, because I'm focused on the heart, once the problem is corrected, for instance, in the procedure area, then I can focus all of my attention on all of these preventative measures. And in many ways, that's kind of the most fulfilling part. The procedure part is, after a while, you kind of get used to doing them. But as these other parts where people really change their life and their lifestyle, that become fulfilling. And what, you can see, I'm excited by doing it because I really do enjoy it.
So, and that's outstanding that you have a career that you're that excited about, is probably one of the most important things in life. And I think everybody wants to find that. Great question from Sachi. How often do you feel stress as related to your job? And a couple other attendees have asked similar questions about how do you manage the stress of what you do for a living, and how has that evolved over time?
I think no matter what you do, there's going to be stress in it. It's really, the question is, how do you manage it? For procedures, high risk procedures that we do, I always worry about the patient and the family, but I know how with medicine, I can translate that worry into, or I can sort of mitigate it by technical awareness and knowledge, and you can deal with it. So I have a strategy to deal with the stress by what I know in terms of the medical procedure and the techniques that I feel that I'm facile in. So that's kind of how you deal with it. That having been said, when a complication occurs, of course your heart sinks, but you train yourself to sort of not just freeze, you train yourself to sort of jump into action, not, sort of like this, where everything's, not controlled, but in a very controlled fashion to deal with the complication. And at the end of those procedures, I mean, you're exhausted, you feel really, really tired. But if you were able to get out of a bad situation, you feel very fortunate that happened. You don't feel complacent. You don't feel like that you're patting yourself on the back because you never know when the next one could occur. But you at least feel that your training helped you, and more importantly, helped the patient.
Speaking of your training, does any one individual mentor or an individual course at any point in your life stand out as being particularly helpful in getting you to this unflappable state where you can perform these complex tasks under stress?
I think they all do. And I think this will sort of segue nicely into sort of where, RHS and all the people I've met over the years have sort of helped me become the person I am now. I've always been one, I trained at a bunch of different places, as you mentioned. I never stayed at one place more than 3 or 4 years. It's not because they didn't like me, I hope. I think it's because I always wanted to sort of get the best part of a specific place and perhaps recognize the weaknesses of that place, avoid the weaknesses, take the best parts, and then move someplace else where people might do it differently. And so for me, there's really been a ton of people, ranging from my parents first and foremost, to teachers in school, friends in school, people in college, my wife, all these people over the years who've sort of helped to make me become who I am. And I mean it with medicine. What's actually nice is that I can bring all those things to bear in the way I treat patients, because it's a fundamental human interaction when you're dealing with a patient. And yes, we're talking about medicine and that sort of thing, but one of the best things about it is you're talking to a patient about their basic life, and you have to sort of be centered as a person yourself, learning from your mistakes and capitalizing on your strengths to be able to be effective in that way. And for me, that's kind of why I wouldn't really be able to pick up one. I can sort of think of so many people who've helped me over the years.
As an educator or as a professor, are you teaching first, second year med students, and how do you go about those types of interactions?
It's really a mix. It's for me, because we're so specialized, I'm typically working with what we call fellows. So they've completed 4 years of medical school, they've completed 3 years of internal medicine residency, and then they've done another 3 years of cardiology, and then they're doing interventional cardiology fellowship for 1 or 2 years. So we work with both general cardiology fellows as well as interventional cardiology fellows. I also work with residents and medical students who sometimes come along to see what the procedures are like. Again, I like teaching at those various different levels. And I just try to get people understanding what a sense is of what we're trying to do for the patients, and what it's like. I also work very closely with them on research projects, because part of being an academic physician is we run clinical trials to determine which therapies are more effective or less effective. And we write a lot of papers in that way. And so we do a ton of writing, medical writing, even opinion writing, that kind of thing, editorials. So that aspect of what I do is really manifest as well.
Do you have any particular strategies on or things that have helped you balance your work life, career, and has that changed in COVID?
Well, look, I was fortunate that I always had a bunch of different interests, and I would highly recommend for the students on the call that make sure that you take care of yourself as a person in addition to what you are in the classroom, because those are things you draw strength from in a variety of times, tough times, good times. They're just really helpful. So for me, I played multiple instruments growing up. I was in the jazz band at RHS. I also played tennis on the team. And first, that was just really informative because it were just totally different groups of people that I got to interact with and, hopefully move seamlessly between. But then subsequent to that, in my life, like now, I'll go home, and if it's a stressful day, I'll play, an hour and a half of the guitar. Or today was a really nice day outside. In the middle of the day, I went for a run. Luckily, because like when you get to be the director, you can kind of make the schedule a little bit. So I was able to find that window and then go. But those things really help you because I think sort of my theme of things is you always have to be trying to do different things, and you never know when an individual thing is going to help you more than something else. And the ability to do multiple things gives you the option to then fall upon one of those other things. I like skiing, I like hiking. We were talking about that earlier. So my family is so important to me, not just my immediate family, my wife, 2 kids, and our dog, Oliver, but also my extended family, my brother, my sister. And so those things are really sources of strength for me, particularly during tough times.
Stefan wants to know if you have a favorite book outside of medicine or type of book.
Outside of medicine, it's the type of books, they vary a little bit, I guess. I just started an audiobook on, it's called The Book of Joy, it's conversations between Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama, and it's pretty nice. It's actually calming, especially for these times. I read a variety of different things. To be honest with you, I don't get to read as much as I should because I'm doing a lot of medical reading, and then there's time to do other things like sports or music or things like that. But basically, I have an open mind. Anything that's good, and I rely upon family members of mine, like my daughter or other people, to sort of recommend things to me, and then I go with it there. I read a recent book, actually a really good one that I can think of is actually written for kids. John Lewis has a series of 3 books called March for kids. And I have to profess, I knew nothing about the civil rights era, frankly. I don't know how this happened, growing up and where we grew up, but I really didn't know much about it. And reading and seeing those pictures made a big difference for me, even though it was a kid's book. So I would highly recommend those 3 books.
Well, you do have 1 or 2 people in the family who know about history. So
yeah, they're embarrassed of my lack of knowledge in that area. So my little sister and her husband, they helped me a little bit, helped me along.
Who's the best at tennis in the family?
Oh, my brother, no question. It was brutal. He's younger than I am, so I have 3 kids, three siblings. Actually, I have 2 siblings. I'm one of 3. I was the oldest. My brother's 5.5 years younger, and my sister is another year and a half younger there. He was smaller than me, he was younger than me, and he could beat me in tennis, he could beat me in basketball, and he knew exactly how to talk trash to make me feel worse about it. And he still does.
Hey, Tim, for those that don't know, do you want to mention who Dr. Kirtane's sister and brother-in-law are?
For the uninitiated viewers, that would be social studies teacher extraordinaire, Miss Maida Kirtane, and social studies supervisor, Mr. Ferrari.
Tim, I'm going to interject with a question because someone asked a question right up front that we haven't answered, and I'm kind of curious about it. I think we're so fortunate in some ways living in this country with the medical care we can get, and for those of that live near New York City, certainly even more so. But can you talk about, someone asked a question, are patients from abroad seeking your help? But just in general, the global nature of healthcare and the lack of probably fairness and how you help with that or how you think about that. I mean, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are in that area. Yeah,
it's a great question. Fortunately, I've been able to, lecture abroad and teach abroad and I have WhatsApp chats with physicians in India and and WeChat with China and other places in Europe and that sort of thing. And at least in our field, it's small enough that we all kind of communicate with each other. We see each other at meetings and we try to disseminate good practices amongst a lot of people. But the issues you bring up about the disparities, that those you can sort out depending on what your interests are. And for instance, in my 4th year of medical school, I spent time with Burmese refugees outside of New Delhi. And it was unbelievable. These folks had left from Burma. They insisted on calling it Burma because they thought Myanmar was not, going to be what they wanted to call it. And you can still see what's happening there right now. These are refugees and they're living in a different country. Their healthcare is terrible, and they just sort of make do with it. And you just have to keep your eyes open to that kind of thing, because we all are sort of caught up in our own worlds. And if we don't think beyond our own worlds, then that's to the detriment of a lot of people. And so it's not to say that I do all kinds of things to help people outside, but I think just awareness is a start. And I think we're all better for some awareness.
I have, there's a alum on here who's going to be a future colleague of yours, and I think might be in one of those WhatsApp chats where you guys are discussing the technical side of everything. Y Zoomer graduated at RHS 2 years ago, and he says, thank you for doing this, and would like to ask, do you have any advice for developing research background as an undergraduate student, particularly in generating ideas for new research projects?
First of all, I think it's amazing that people are doing research at the undergraduate level and even high school level nowadays. People are so differentiated early that it's super impressive. It's hard to come up with original ideas if you don't know the space well. So you kind of almost have to sort of be in something to then understand the complexity of it. That's not to say that it has to be that way, but that's generally how it works. So what I would say is that if you can find somebody who you like to work with, and you sort of read their publications or read what they're about, and that's something that aligns with you, then you may be able to start finding ideas along that route. What is cool though now with the internet and what's out there is you can do a lot of research on your own. You don't have necessarily the best context in which to understand it all. So we definitely run into people who sort of are WebMDs, but yet lack the ability to, having seen patients, to kind of understand what's going on. But more information is better than no information. So it's just a matter of understanding all those things and then coming up with ideas. And once in a while, you'll see somebody who is able to come up with ideas de novo on their own without even having spent a lot of time in a specific field, and that's super impressive.
And I have a feeling Wise might have been doing research like that in middle school. So I know you're watching. Thanks for attending, Wise. Dr. Kirtane, I have what is a question from a student who graduated in 2008. And this is a little bit personal, but I think you'll like this one. So Jason Lawani says, as a fellow Indian American who went through RHS, the pressure to get into medical, dental, law, etc. from family is real. A, how would you deal with that pressure differently looking back? And B, if you weren't to go into the medical field, what profession or field might you have gotten into? And he is in sales, marketing, and technology now.
I just have to thank my parents and my family specifically for never overtly ever, especially until I got to college, perhaps, even mentioning that you should be going into medicine or something like that. It's probably an atypical experience. That having been said, every single one of my family members is a physician or an engineer. So, maybe they were smart enough to realize that they had to apply no pressure, but yet that subtle pressure was there because those were the only role models you saw. So I think the challenge is really you just have to have enough role models that are outside of certain professions to understand what else is out there. And that may be a way to help. I will say that it's great that I enjoy what I do. Someone had written, is there one thing what's one thing you should have known before you went into medicine? I think the one thing I would wanted to know is you really have to like it to make it worthwhile, because of the amount of training, the physical strain, mental strain, all those things that go into it. So I was fortunate enough that it was perfect for me. But I know there are a lot of kids out there for whom that's not the case. And if you're feeling pressured to be that, then I think you just have to convey those things transparently. And again, I was really fortunate that my family is super welcoming, transparent, and and all of us were able to sort of talk about those things, especially now. And for that, I'm fortunate.
And that was great because a question we had just received was, do you have advice for future med students that are coming from the high school background? And I think that was a great answer to that. I was wondering if we could start to bring it a little closer to Ridgewood. I've got to say, I've got some questions. Your choice of fashion tonight, did you maybe want to explain to the audience?
Yes.
Are you just super cool, or?
This is my shirt, RHS class of 1990. The back, I'll ask any class of 1990 out there who know what the back says. Maybe someone wants to type it in the chat. If not, then I'll divulge what it says. Yeah, this was given to all of the class as we entered, because we were the first class of ninth graders or freshmen to be in the high school. And Jason, there you go, his first frosh. That's what it says on the back. So we were the first class of in the high school. It's actually kind of funny, but I had actually had exposure to the high school when I was at BF, because you know, I think I liked math, and I was taking a course in math with Miss Glotzer at the high school when I was in 8th grade. And so that was the first period of the day. So I would ride over there on my bicycle, and then I'd ride back. Diana Cruz writes the small bus, which is actually, I didn't usually take the bus because I lived close to BF, so I would ride my bike. And I think she and another guy, Paul Riskin, would ride the small bus. The interesting thing, I'll just tell this one story, which is actually kind of embarrassing, but I remember it vividly because it's not easy, like an undersized Indian, you know, 8th grader being in class with a bunch of 9th and 10th. And we were doing proofs at one point, and Ms. Glotzer asked, you know, what something was, and the answer to it was the contrapositive. And it is after 8, so I can say this, but I raised my hand and she called on me, and I said the contraceptive. And all the kids, especially coming from like the small 8th grade, you know, it was just bad. It was bad. So anyway, we all then made our way after 8th grade to the high school. We were the first class, and we had specific restrictions, like we weren't allowed off campus where the other classes were. And so I remember, like, I think Jim Reamer used to go around in this bus and trying to round people up as people tried to sneak off campus for lunch and do things like that, until we finally were afforded those privileges after 10th grade.
That is such a throwback to hear about, and I have older siblings, and I just took for granted that there was always a 9th grade cohort at the high school. I had no idea that there was a time when it was sophomore through senior only at the high school. So on this note, I have to ask, if you were a student at the high school today, I know that your favorite teacher, your favorite class would be history, and Miss Kirtane would be your favorite teacher.
I would fail out. I've heard that like people literally have dropped her class because she's such a rigorous and great teacher. So, you know, it would have been a problem. I think it would have been a problem.
Did you have a favorite teacher? Was it Miss Glotzer back in the day, or was there anyone who stands out as your favorite?
You know, there's so many, and in prepping for this, it was so great to kind of go back down memory lane and think of all these people. And you know, I feel hesitant to state names because then I'm going to miss somebody. But just, you know, there was Mr. G. Gobieski was, you know, it's just a force, and he was great. He was a math teacher. He had these big hands. We would sometimes, I don't even know why, we would thumb wrestle, and he like broke my finger practically because his thumb was just like bang, and it went things like that. There were just so many great teachers. Miss Patty Johnson, super enthusiastic. When you were talking about enthusiasm for your field, I still vividly remember when she would start talking about biology topics, she would get so excited that she'd start going like this with her hands. And at the time, I think high school kids can be really cruel, and we would sort of, and there's a lot that I learned from going back and thinking about the ways, you know, that we could be cruel, but it actually was formative for me to see somebody that excited about her career and that excited about something that she was thinking about, that like you wish you could have excitement like that in your job, because certainly as you get older in life, it's that excitement that keeps you going. So she was great. All that whole science wing, I had good classes. I know Billy with his friends, Jonah Myers and others, in Miss Green's chemistry class, we also used to joke that she would, she liked to watch the Bunsen burner alight, and she would kind of gleam at it a little bit. And at one point, I think Jonah Myers grabbed the fire extinguisher off the wall and like started threatening to like blow it out and stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of fun stories from back then. But there were a lot of teachers who were great, and teachers who allow you to make mistakes, but then would correct you. I learned to write 100% at Ridgewood, and I write every single day of my life. As I said, medical writing, a lot of papers, a lot of things like that. And I pride myself on my writing as part of what I do. And that's, yeah, that was formative in the high school. So things like that, the sports teams, the quiz bowl and all that, and as well as the music. Jeff Haas letting me actually do jazz band when I really wasn't allowed to do it because I wasn't a member of the concert band because of my academic classes. He didn't have to do that, he did. And because I played jazz and did improv solos, now I can play guitar and do stuff like that afterwards. So a lot of people who helped a lot.
I got to say, when we planned this talk, and I thought of all of my classmates who are particularly bright, one of my best friends is Jonah Myers. I know him since kindergarten. He is not a name that I thought would come up in an interview about one of the world's leading cardiologists. But a great guy and very funny.
You know, just one thing off of that, though, I'll say is people ask, what's the number one trait that you need to be a good physician? And I actually think it's empathy. I think it's the ability to relate to other people. And you gain that through all the relationships that you have over the years, if you pay attention to them, and if you care. And for me, that's kind of why those relationships, not only within school, but I also had them outside being Indian. But one of the challenges of Ridgewood at the time was that it was pretty homogenous, and I definitely suppressed my Indian identity for a long period of time. And I didn't want my mom to wear saris at any school events growing up, or anything like that. And fortunately, as I got to the end of my high school, my parents and family were involved in an organization, extracurricular, outside of school, where it's sort of an Indian school for philosophy and culture. And just by being exposed to that, I was able to sort of get back in touch with my Indian identity again. And at the time, it was interesting because like I viewed Ridgewood as kind of like a colorblind place. You just didn't think of color. But the problem with being colorblind is that so many people's existences are based upon how they're perceived because they are of color. So being colorblind is a position of extreme, extraordinary privilege, which frankly is not great. And so ultimately, you know, through that organization, through my parents being involved, ultimately through my wife, who's also Indian, and then beyond, I've come to kind of embrace my Indianness. And Diana Cruz had written that she pronounced my name wrong all those years because I never corrected it. It's actually pronounced Kirtane, but everybody kind of called me, you know, up to 5th grade, it was Ajay Kirtane, and then it was Ajay Kirtane. And so now, you know, I of course, you know, like to correct people because it's supposed to be pronounced Ajay Kirtane, and you guys did it flawlessly. So those are things that I suppressed for a long time. And it's not, I don't think it's Ridgewood's fault. And there's been so much change over the years, which I'm so excited. Like I've been at the International Festival at the high school. It's like an unbelievable event that I couldn't fathom would ever happen. But now it does, which is so great. And so I don't mean it to be doom and gloom. It was a different time. But at least now there's a lot of recognition of that. And I commend the school and just the world, I guess, for kind of waking up to it.
Well, on that note about Asian Festival, I hope that your sister is watching because she does a phenomenal job with that every single year, and as do every one of the students that participate. And on that note of culturalism, I can't help but hearing your story and referring back to my early years as an educator. I came across a book called The Namesake by one of probably the best authors in the world, if not the best American author of her generation, Jhumpa Lahiri, which really spoke to a lot of those issues. For anyone watching this podcast who perhaps might be interested in learning a little bit more about how it is balancing two national identities, being either first, second, or even a third generation American, I definitely have that book recommendation for you, and it's worth looking at this topic closer. Bill, I don't know if you got the same update on your phone. I got a weather update that says that there's thunder.
Yeah, Tim, I know what you're talking about. It's I think it's about to open up in here. So we're entering a different segment here called the lightning round. And I know you're a smart guy and you're very credentialed. And Tim basically asked you a few softballs here. These are the really hard questions. So I don't want you to get nervous or anything, but
I'm gonna roll up my sleeves.
Yeah,
Okay,
you
here we
should.
go.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you need to take a drink or something, we basically put about 60 seconds on the clock, and I want you to give us your answer of the first thing that pops in your head. And you also need to put on, a little bit of go back in time with Ridgewood, because some of these things are from a different era. But okay, just let me know when you're ready, because I don't want you to be nervous or anything here. You ready?
Go
Okay,
for
I'm
it.
gonna just let it rip. Okay. Favorite place to get ice cream growing up?
Ice cream, gosh, Van Dyke's.
Best Ridgewood tradition?
I guess at that time, I mean, people wouldn't relate to it now, but at that time, it'd be the Ridgewood sarcasm lingo thing that we all did.
Interesting. Tell me something only a kid from Travell would understand.
Kid from Travell. I'd say there was this. It was very nerve-wracking to figure out who is going to be your date for like the 5th grade dance.
Favorite teacher before you got to RHS?
Before, well, I could say Miss Glotzer, because I mean, I wasn't technically at the high school at the time.
Okay. If I asked you in RHS what you'd be doing now, what would you have said?
What do you mean, right? Oh, and back then?
Yeah.
Oh, anything other than medicine.
Okay. Lenny's or Renato's?
Actually, it's Pizza Hut on Route 17, in a car blasting Def Leppard's Hysteria.
Best place in Ridgewood when you want to be alone with your thoughts?
Sorry, say that again. My internet cut out for a second.
Best place in Ridgewood when you want to be alone with your thoughts?
I think up on the ridge, overlooking the rest of the town and with the city view in the distance.
Okay. RHS achievement you're most proud of?
Oh, this is. I'm embarrassed and proud, but I won the county chess tournament as a horrendous chess player. And for any of you who saw the Queen's Gambit, which is actually awesome, basically, I know it's a lightning round, but sorry. I was not very good, and I lost my queen in one of the matches, and I still kept going because I thought the other person was a bit of a jerk, and the person completely decompensated, and I somehow won despite having given up my queen, not as a sacrifice. And so, yeah, that was an accomplishment that I'm secretly proud of. I shouldn't be that proud of it, but I am secretly proud.
Yeah, good. No, there's no shame in that. Okay, where do the Kirtane families set up their chairs for 4th of July?
Oh, great question. It's typically at Vets Field, stage left.
Okay, and then the bonus question related is how many days in advance did you set them up?
None now, because we actually live relatively close to there, so we can walk over, and sometimes we can actually even see them from the house. So we've gotten lazy over the years.
Okay. All right, last question. Most iconic building in Ridgewood?
I'd say probably, I mean, between the high school and the library, but they've all of them been renovated. So they've both been renovated, so they're different now, but probably still the same.
Okay, great. Well, you did great. 10 for 10. So nice job on the lightning round. Tim, we'll go back to you here.
Yeah, I'm gonna give a big thank you. This was an incredible experience for me. I hope that everybody in the audience had as much fun having, on the one hand, these incredibly technical conversations and questions about the field of cardiology, and I've learned so much in preparation for this event and hearing some of the answers. And on the other hand, I really love hearing from people who've gone through the Ridgewood school system. I just love hearing stories about what people have done. And thank you so much for sharing so much of your personal life. I think it's going to make a huge difference to both the young members of the audience and folks that have graduated and are alumni. I know that we had talked about putting your contact information up for anybody who's interested in reaching out. And I was wondering if I could just have you give the green light to anyone in the audience to contact you on Twitter or LinkedIn, so they know I'm not pushing this for no reason.
No, for sure. I'm happy to. And honestly, I just want to say that for me, just you both reaching out and allowing this event to occur, I just connected with like several people that like were formative to my high school, time in high school and be me as a person, frankly. And I never would have done it without you guys, honestly. So this association is really important. I told one of our chief fellow, her name is Ellie Cormilla. So she's a trainee, but she's a chief. She's awesome. She texted me earlier today and she said, "You're doing this thing." And I said, I do these Zooms and meetings and stuff all the time. And I honestly haven't been like excited / nervous for one in a really long time. And this I was, because I think it meant a lot to me in a way that I probably didn't perceive well. And just reflecting back on things was great. So for me, yeah, absolutely connect anytime. This is, Twitter and LinkedIn. I'm not on Facebook, I'm not like young enough or cool enough to be on like Insta or Snapchat or anything like that. But certainly happy to answer questions, medical or otherwise. And I just want to thank everybody in the town and all of that for what I was able to sort of learn during that time. As I said, it wasn't perfect, definitely mistakes, but you learn from the mistakes, and there was just so much upside to it that I, thank my parents for actually buying a house there and letting us be part of it.
Well, like I said, this was extra special because one of the COVID restrictions has been that the students who would normally be doing regular job shadowing and internships at the Valley Hospital and other sites around the area haven't really had that opportunity. So I think it was really, really special and well-timed for you to be able to participate this evening and give them that experience. I'm now going to turn the event back over to Bill, but before I do, I wanted to mention to our audience that when you exit the Zoom webinar this evening, there will be a brief poll. If you could give us a little bit of feedback on this event. There are a couple questions about how you heard about it and maybe some ideas for future events and future careers that the RHS Alumni Association should pursue. So I want to thank Dr. Kirtane one more time and turn it back over to my esteemed colleague, Mr. McCabe.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Tim, if you could just back up before we get into John Elton, I just want to thank Dr. Kirtane too. I'll give Tim and I credit and our whole committee, Fiona and Jamie and others, for one thing, and that is picking great speakers. We've had 3 speakers so far, and they've been very different backgrounds. But if there's something that's in common, and you certainly uphold this 100%, is they're very smart and they're very down to earth. And I just appreciate your spending time with us. And I know there's a lot of students on here, but it's been our pleasure having you. So thanks so much for participating. We greatly appreciate it. You were terrific. So with that, I will turn to our next one. We want you to save the date. Our 4th installment of the Alumni Career Lecture Series will take in another direction, and that is more in the venture capital vein. So John Elton, a 1991 graduate of RHS. He's been a partner at the really famous venture capital firm Graycroft Partners for a number of years, and they're investors behind some of the largest tech companies in the world. And I think it'll be a very interesting background. John is a big speaker and a talking head in a lot of ways. He's on CNBC and other places, so he might be recognizable to some of you, but that'll be a great chat. So anyone interested in venture capital, entrepreneurship, things of that nature, I think you'll think it's a great talk, and I hope you can join us. I want to just close out with a couple of things about the Alumni Association. We have an alumni apparel store, and I invite you to take a look. Great for gifts for your classmates and friends and family members that might have gone to RHS. The big hot item right now are those 2 hats you see, the trucker hats. They've been flying off the shelves. You can see the sweatshirts and other things we have. And then what's kind of cool in the middle box, at least 2 of those items are from stores of Ridgewood High School graduates. So we've been trying to get Ridgewood High School graduates more involved with our store here as well. And when you go into the apparel store, you'll see the URL at the bottom. There's actually some bios for the Birdling bags and the Hudson Sutler products, because again, they're from companies founded by RHS grads. So check out our store, and hope you see some items that you might like. 2 other quick things. One is we have a commemorative bricks campaign, and this funds many of the things we do. So you'll see in the picture to the left, the bricks curtain the walkways around RHS. There are 2 bricks products, a 4x8 brick. You'll see mine up there, Bill McCabe, class of '89. And then there's an 8x8. There's Dr. Gorman and his family that all graduated from RHS as well. They, again, fund a lot of our projects. There was an announcement that the deadline for seniors that wanted to buy a brick was March 5th. And in order to get it in the ground in time for graduation, we're extending that. So if you missed that deadline, it's going to be extended, and we're going to extend it for a few weeks. So please get those purchases in by March 5th. And then finally, I just want to mention that we are, again, a nonprofit organization, 100% volunteer organization. And I certainly know that it's not something that everybody can do. But if you can do it and you have interest, we'd welcome donations to the organization to help fund some of the programs and projects. Even tonight, costs some money to put on, not tremendously much, but some of the other events like the Reunions Weekend, Distinguished Alumni events certainly do. So there's ways you can donate through PayPal and credit card, and really any amount is helpful. If you or someone in your world is interested in making a larger gift, whether a restricted donation, unrestricted donation, I'd be happy to talk to you. So that's just something that's there for you. This is also available on the website at rhsalumniassociation.org/donate. But that's all we have for tonight. We really enjoyed everyone attending, and we hope you'll enjoy it. You'll join us for the 4th installment with John Elton. I just want to thank Dr. Kirtane for being a great interviewee, and to Tim Monahan for being a terrific interviewer. And I want to thank you all, and I hope you have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.